Well, thank you, brothers, very, very much. I'm not sure that you ought to be thanking me for living a long time. I thank God and the universe for, letting me be here this long. I'm blessed, actually. I've been blessed from conception. I was born into an intact, able, loving, caring family that made sure that I got educated. And then after that stroke of good luck, I married a woman 75 years ago. She lived with me for 70 years before God took her. And I suppose between my parents and Susan, my wife, and now, of course, my kids, it is family that has brought me here and kept me here and made sure that I'm doing something useful. When Cassandra told me this morning that she wanted me to say something, I wanted to decline. You know, when you get to be almost 100 years old and can complete a sentence, you're pretty fortunate. But I'm never quite sure when I begin a sentence that I can remember what I intended to say long enough to get it said. So I wasn't necessarily thrilled at the opportunity to say something, but I did make some notes, and I'll say a little bit, and I'll make it brief before I mess up. In thinking about what I could say, it occurred to me that I might talk about one of the most interesting events in my life in the fraternity. I was still a pledgee. My blind brothers and I were challenged by the brothers in the fraternity to debate the cardinal principles. We were supposed to talk about manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift. And while we recognize their equal importance, we were given the task of pitting them against each other, which was the most important. And I volunteered to talk about manhood. But my brothers said no. They wanted me to talk about scholarship. And the reason that they wanted me to talk about scholarship was that I had the lowest, not the highest, I had the lowest grade point average on my line. They almost had to change the rules to get me in. For the next several months while we were online, and for the first year in the fraternity, I remember it was Brother Frank Coleman. He was professor of math and physics at Howard in those days, who every time I'd pass him on campus, and occasionally he would invite me in to talk about it. He wanted to know how I was doing. And he got his good friend, fellow professor Alain Locke, professor of philosophy,
wow,
to take me under his wing to help me learn how to be a student. From that time on, scholarship has had special meaning for me. I'll jump ahead, 40 years, I guess, to 30 years, to the time that I got to know personally W.E.B. Dubois.
My God.
And it was Dubois who really shaped my commitment to scholarship. I had gotten sufficiently online by the time I met Dubois to have, earned my bachelor's degree and a divinity degree and a master's degree and a doctor of education. But I still was, I don't think, a thinking person. Dubois and I used to have supper. He was living in Brooklyn at that time. I was living up in the Dunbar apartments in Harlem. I drove him around, had dinner with him occasionally, did errands for him. But one of the things he taught me was the difference between knowing and understanding.
Mm.
He says it's important to know. In fact, he was one of those people with an almost encyclopedic mind. He seemed to know something about everything. But the unique thing about the way he approached issues was he always wanted to know the context in which the thing had developed, and even more important, the context in which you were experiencing it. Because he argued that you didn't really understand something, that you didn't really know something until you understood it. He said, unless you understand it and understand how it relates to other things, you don't fully don't fully know it. I'm not sure that I had run into that notion before Dubois, and I was past that's the 1950s. I was 30 years old by then, but certainly since that time, it has been with me. And I have been appreciative of the fact that of all the gifts God gave to us, the capacity of mind is probably the best, the most important, the most valuable, because it is with the human mind that we experience God. It's with the human mind that we make sense out of things. We generate relationships between things. But the most remarkable thing about the human mind is its capacity, our capacity to deal with phenomena that have never existed before. We call it imagination, the capacity to think about things that have not existed before. When I wrote my 3-volume memoir, I called it Pedagogical Imagination, because I recognize that my approach to education as a profession and education as a vehicle for human service, it was my capacity to think about the problems of learning and the ways in which we have to shape learning experiences in order for people to learn, in order for people to develop intelligence, pedagogical imagination. Now, I better quit now because I am running out of my memory of what I wanted to say to you. I think it was to remind you, yes, to remind you of our cardinal principles. Yes, I was attracted by manhood. No, still important. I believe in perseverance, and I certainly believe in uplift. But my career, I think, has been most shaped by scholarship.
Mm.
And I came to appreciate scholarship when a mega man said to me, "Hey, look, Professor, if you're going to be a mega man, you got to get your act together. You got to learn the stuff." And from Du Bois, I learned that in addition to learning it and knowing it, I needed to understand it. Thank you, brothers. Thank you very much for recognizing me.
Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.